Hello and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm doing pretty good. Oh man, I have mulberries now. Everything's early this year. Usually we don't have mulberries yet, but they are dropping like crazy. And we have a problem. The puppy thinks they're wonderful.
Yeah.
So, in order to prevent him from having poo-apocalypse in the house, we have to watch him when we let him outside because he will just eat them and eat them and eat them.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll let you go on here in a second, but I reminded me, I want to tell my little mulberry story. About 2 months ago, I have that male mulberry tree that I planted back by the rare rabbit pen. And it's, of course, it doesn't put off any mulberries. I've always just used it for the leaves to feed the rabbits with, right? It's just, it's a coppice tree that I use for that. And well, I decided I don't want to plant any more mulberries on the property, but I do want to have some berries. So a couple months ago, the neighbors have like an old junk tree that they don't pay any attention to on the back. That's a female, puts off tons of berries. So I went back there and I took a few of the limbs off of it and I grafted them onto my male mulberry on part of it, the part that hangs over the yard. And sure enough, those limbs are producing mulberries.
That is cool.
So I basically just added female branches to a male tree to produce mulberries on a few branches, which I thought was really cool.
I took a bunch of cuttings from my male and female mulberries, and I tried putting them in some hormone water, grafting hormone water, and it's not working. So I think I'm going to have to do the other method, which is supposedly tried and true, where you just dip it in, you take the cutting and then you dip it in the powdered rooting hormone and then you just stick it in the ground like I did with the elderberries. And supposedly that works way better. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't work in the water. That's what my husband's mom always did.
I've stuck them in the ground before, just took the stick and stuck it in the ground before and it root and take off.
Well, apparently it's just too much water to put them in a bucket of water, which is how my mother-in-law always did a lot of her cuttings and they just all died. So I'm gonna do it again.
I have heard of people taking like with that, they'll stick the cutting in there, and then they'll also kind of scrape up a piece of willow branch and stick that in there with it. And it will.
Well, that's what I did.
Oh, you did put willow branch in there with it.
I have willow in there, yeah, and they have all. I don't think I see nothing going on, and it's been over a week.
Okay,
which is still could happen. I'm going to leave them in there, but I think I'm going to do the other method too because I really, really need these to work so I can take them with me when we move,
or just graft onto some take them up and graft them onto a mulberry that's already on your property.
Everything that I have that's a mulberry on the property is pretty small still, so
that's what I'm saying. You could just dig that up, relocate it where you want it, and then just cut it about 6 inches tall and then just graft right onto that.
I've never done any grafting. I should try it, but I'm a little.
Mulberry is one of the easier things I think.
What I have at the property are white mulberry from Nick Ferguson.
I think it would graft. Any mulberry would probably graft onto that stock, I bet.
Yeah, so we'll see. That was a experimentation, I think, failure, but we'll see. My elderberry that you gave me, some of them looked a little bit stressed because we've had that high heat, and they actually look way better now that we got a ton of rain. So
I have one that looks like you sent me a picture of the one you showed that was pretty stressed. And now I have one that looks kind of like that too. That's kind of struggling, but I have so many of them. I'm not real worried about it, but I do have.
I wasn't too worried about it either, other than I sent it to you to make sure it wasn't a disease because I have them all pretty close together right now.
It did look like a disease, and that's what I was even thinking about. Mine almost does look like some kind of a wilting, almost like a pearl or something like that on an elderberry is what it almost looks like.
Is yours looking better?
Well, we did get a good rain yesterday morning, and I haven't looked at it since. So maybe
I'm going to have to go look at mine and make sure, because if it is, you gave me enough that I would probably just pull that one out and
I'm almost
separate it and maybe put it in a pot by itself away from the other ones.
Yeah. I'm almost wondering if I should cut that one down too, in case there is something spreading. But all my others look great. It's just that one. It's kind of one on the very end too. Where I
just wasn't sure because I also get moles and stuff that will tunnel down under the ground, and they really like that area for some reason. So I thought, well, maybe the mole has gotten to the roots, and I wasn't sure what was going on with it. So I'll go check it and look and make sure that nothing's going. But I have so many elderberry flowers on all of those elderberries that you gave me.
You can use those too. I mean,
Yeah, I've
flowers,
seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. I wanted to, I thought, and I probably should have, and maybe I still could, cut the flowers back and save them just so that the energy goes into the roots anyways, since they're all new. Well,
I tell you what, I find elderberry is just such an easy plant to grow. I mean, it's such an easy bush to grow. They need so little care.
Right. Well, apparently mulberry is the same, but I killed it. Maybe
I cut mine down to just a couple, 2 or 3 feet tall every year just to kind of get them under control because they get so big and bushy, and I'll cut them back and then they'll grow 8, 9, 10 feet tall the next year. It's crazy.
Well, they worked fantastic because I still have probably 90% of what you sent me with.
So probably 40, 45 of them probably you got. Yes. Great. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I am still, I can't believe this, waiting for my kale and my Brussels sprouts to start to dry, my seeds to start to dry out. So I was letting the seed pods, I let them go to seed. So these are last year's kale and Brussels sprouts. I let them overwinter. And then this year they have gone to seeds, and they kind of look like green beans, but really, really, really skinny ones. Mm-hmm. And the seeds have been there for quite a while, a couple of months. And I thought they would start to dry out because once they started to dry out, I was going to cut them down, bring them inside so I don't lose the seeds. But they haven't even started to dry out. It's taking a really long time.
Wow.
But it's taking up garden space. So I'm tempted, but I want to make sure the seeds are mature before I yank them.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I'm still waiting on that.
Yeah, at the nursery. We'll call that your nursery because you're doing seed growth. You're trying to get seeds. You're trying to take cuttings. You're doing so your home now is your nursery, and then everything's going to the property.
Yeah, I mean, I have a small garden still. Like I have potatoes in there and tomatoes and peppers, just not the huge amounts that I normally have.
I think a little video where you were kind of out in your garden doing a little talk, and it's looking really good.
Yeah, it's pretty full. I have a couple of empty spots, but we have some plants we're going to split and put in there. The idea was we would split plants now and move them in the fall because they transplant a lot better in the fall, especially since we can't water them. But it would also still make the plants here look full for next spring when we go to sell. Yeah. So, we didn't want to make it look like we robbed all of the plants from the house when we moved. We've had, I don't know, I forget what I have mentioned in the podcast and what I've mentioned to you or somebody else, but our county had a ransomware attack.
Really? Yeah, I haven't heard of this.
So the whole county, so it was the police, the fire department, the county offices had a ransomware attack a few weeks ago, and it is stalling all building permits.
Oh, wow.
Which would include ours. So we're stalled because some
can't work.
Ransomware attack. And then like a month and a half before that, our schools got hacked.
Wow.
Same thing. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I don't know. Apparently they need to hire some security people.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, if somebody's pretty techie, that is the trade to go into these days. When you start doing like cybersecurity and stuff, because that's just such a future.
It is crazy how many hacks happen. It's just the world.
That's what my son-in-law does for a living, and it's a very lucrative job too. I mean, it pays very well, and it's just it's something that's really high demand. The cybersecurity.
Yeah, right now I guess there's some big automotive thing that got hacked, and they can't sell cars and stuff like that. It's affecting thousands of dealerships right now.
Wow!
And that started last week.
It may be our downfall in the end.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, but anyways, I guess it will be what it will be. I'm not overly nervous about it. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen, and is what it is.
Yeah, just take it in stride. I'm glad you feel that way about it. Well, I was really happy that we did finally get some rain yesterday because I'd used up all of our water, all the water I had for rain storage, and even had to water a little bit from the city water, and everything just perked right up as soon as it got that nice big rainstorm. I love that. So,
did you cool off after that?
No, well, I mean, we're high 80s still, so
Oof.
yeah, it's still pretty hot. It was mid 90s though for days and days, and it was brutal. It was pretty brutal.
Okay.
Garden looks great though. I do have a lot of things that have bolted and are doing their seed things with radishes, obviously, because I love those radish seed pods. So I ain't about to pull those. Let them go. I'll be yanking those seed pods off there and eating those and making stuff out of them. I love those things. I'm letting on my. This is the first time I've ever tried this. I don't know if you've done this or not. Have you ever grown mustard? Do you grow mustard?
I don't.
Okay, I've grown mustard greens many times, but I've always just eaten them for the greens. Well, this year they bolted pretty early, obviously because of all this heat. And I've been just, browsing the recipes on making your own homemade mustard from the seeds.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got them all bolted. They're putting on pretty heavy seed pods, it looks like. And I guess you get quite a few seeds from them. So I'm looking forward to trying to make my own mustard. So I'm just
Are you going to ferment it?
Who knows where this is going? I don't know. I got to look at all kinds of things. But yeah, I'm going to try to make my own mustard because I like mustard. I'm a big mustard eater. So I thought, man, I'll just try to make let these things go crazy because they are going crazy. Your garden definitely does not look good when everything's going to seed and bolting, but it's a whole nother level of usefulness that you get from your garden. So I like
it. Is that's what's driving me crazy about these Brussels sprouts and kale because it looks so messy.
Yeah,
but I had thousands and thousands of seeds there, and we love to eat sprouts all winter. So I'm like, I might as well just let them go, but it's driving me crazy because it looks so messy.
I always hate letting my lettuce go to seed because it looks so bad. But I plant so much lettuce that if I was going out there to buy all those seeds all the time, I'd spend a lot of money on lettuce seed because I grow lettuce like year round, and indoors and everything else. So I'm always trying to collect as much lettuce seed as I can. So it's like I let it all go to seed. Anything that I didn't get before it bolted, I just let it go all the way to completion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I get a lot of seeds, but it does not look very nice.
No, it does not look pretty, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
Have you picked your garlic yet?
No, it's getting close. Okay. I've been waiting, but you're a couple weeks ahead of me.
Yeah, I picked mine already, and it looked pretty good. I don't think the bulbs were quite as big as last year. It seemed like they were a little smaller this year.
Okay,
but I mean, it's fine. I don't know. I think that could fluctuate. I mean, there could be a lot of factors. It could be the weather. It could have been the nutrients in the soil. Maybe I didn't feed it enough. I don't know. But it didn't look quite as. I did make one mistake. I did plant it in the same bed. I did put compost down, but I also planted it in the same bed. And I wonder if that didn't, because they're such a heavy feeder, I wonder if it didn't stunt it a little bit. But I'm still pretty happy with it. It was a good harvest, and it's all hanging up and curing right now.
I've seen a few people harvesting garlic. I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, around here, everybody's kind of hitting it. And boy, the grapes are looking good this year. I've been out there looking at the grape arbor, and it's just loaded. So I'm looking forward to making some jellies and
nice. I love grapes. Yeah. Love grapes. I'm really excited that all of mine. None of them are going to produce grapes yet, but I'm excited that the vines that I bought look to be doing well.
Yeah. Now, these aren't really very good table grapes because they're pretty tiny. They're good for making jellies and maybe even wine if you want to make wine. I did make wine one year, just trying it out, and it was really good. And the jelly is like the best jelly I've ever eaten out. I mean, it makes the best jelly, and they're Concord grapes.
That homemade jelly is so much better than what you get at the store. Amazing. Oh, you're picking it at the peak of ripeness. They're probably just picking all the grapes all at the same time.
Oh yeah, it makes great grape juice. I mean, like the kids will just. Like you can dilute it a little bit, even it's so strong, and drink it, and it's really good, just grape juice even. And we'll make a bunch of that, and I'll freeze that, and then make jelly later. Thaw it out and make some jelly later too, and that's really nice. Because boy, jelly making that's a weekend job.
That's a process.
It is. It's a long couple days you'll spend making a lot of jars of jelly if you really want to get into it. But
some things are definitely more work to can. Especially it feels like the fruits. A lot of the fruits are more work because you have to peel them, or like a lot of the root vegetables too.
Yeah,
the peeling and the
beets are a lot of work.
I hate peeling beets.
I do too, but I love beets, so it's like I always want to do some, put some away.
But they're also one of those things that would do really well in like a root cellar. So
yeah. If you have a root cellar, if you're fortunate enough to have a root cellar, that'd be the way to go with those because canning them is a process. It's a lot of work.
They're a pain, but I love beets. They're one of my favorites.
Pickled though, so canning and pickling them is really good. So I like that.
Pickled beets are the best.
Well, we're going to get so wrapped up talking about this other stuff. We're not going to get to our main topic.
I know.
Our main topic today is nitrogen fixing plants. And Rachel came up with this idea because she's dealing with some nitrogen fixing plants. And,
I was, we were thinking about an idea last week, trying to think of an idea for this week. And I was transplanting some sea buckthorn seeds that I got. I'm not even sure. It was a Etsy purchase off of somewhere out of Alaska. And so I thought, well, if they did well in Alaska, they're going to do fine here. So I bought these seeds, not anticipating that they would do exceptionally well. And every single seed sprouted. So I have like 25 sea buckthorn, little baby sea buckthorn plants that are probably, I don't know, they're probably about 8 inches tall now. So I was transplanting those, and I'm like, you know what? These are nitrogen fixers. We should do a podcast on nitrogen fixers.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
it's one of many that we will talk about today. And there's more, of course, that
there's so many
to bring up. But it surprises me to find out, though, there is a little bit of misconception on what some people call some nitrogen fixing plants.
Yeah.
And because doing some research, I thought a few were, because I've heard so many people talk about them, to find out technically they're not in the same way. They're not.
Okay. So it'll be interesting.
We'll talk about that when we get to that. Yeah. But I mean, as a person who really likes to build guilds, one of the things I like to include in a guild is at least one nitrogen fixing plant of some kind.
Yeah.
Generally, I like to include some nitrogen fixing. Of course, I want to include some dynamic accumulators. I want, of course, ground covers. And some of those plants are all three of those things. So it's kind of nice if you can even make, kind of multitask with a certain plant even. So,
most of them have something you can eat too.
Yeah. Eat or feed your garden with them, or or feed your animals with them, your livestock with them. Yeah. There's a lot of different medicinal. Yeah. All kinds of things. So, there's some different ways to look at that. So I'm really big because I like permaculture, because I like building guilds, because I like I'm really into sustainable or even regenerative agriculture.
Right.
I think that nitrogen fixing plants play a big part in that. So it's nice to consider them and really understand them and how they work in conjunction with your other plants. But what makes these plants nitrogen fixing plants is the fact that they can convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form that's usable by the plants.
Right. So it's in the air, and then the plants put it down into the soil through their roots. Yeah,
right. And they actually they'll develop these nodules. Yeah, I was looking for the word nodules on their roots.
Nodules.
And it's a bacteria. And now there's some different kind. There's rhizobia. Now I did a little more research in that. There's actually another kind too, and I'd have to look it up. There's actually another, like the alder trees don't do rhizobia. They actually produce a different kind of bacteria. And they're a nitrogen fixing tree also. But so there's a couple different kinds of bacteria. Yeah, there's a couple different kinds of bacteria, but most commonly it's the rhizobia bacteria and these nodules. And they'll kind of convert into ammonia, and then it makes it so other plants can absorb and use that nitrogen. So it's kind of a cool process. And
it's like this exchange that happens in the soil between plants. It's really cool.
Yeah. Of course, if you can actually get plants to put nitrogen into your soil, you don't have to use any kind of synthetic nitrogen or even just any kind of fertilizer or anything for nitrogen. So it's
right. And those plants probably, if it's anything like human nutrition, your body takes up that stuff way better when it's actually a food than a synthetic. And it's the same way with plants. When it's a plant feeding another plant, it's going to take it up so much better than when you're using a chemical fertilizer. Yeah.
And even if you don't believe that, there's still a lot of reasons to go that route, because you get more than just the nitrogen from that tree. There's biodiversity and, habitat and usually food or medicinal or whatever other purposes those feed. So it has multiple purposes even beyond that nitrogen.
And you don't have to pay for it.
You don't have to pay for it. Exactly. So it's so much better on so many levels to get that nitrogen that way than it is to feed it. Now, some people will say, well, I don't need nitrogen fixing plants because I have animals. I have all the nitrogen and that manure I need. yeah, I mean, you can go that route and it will supply a ton of nitrogen, but I still think that you can get so much more from those plants other than just the nitrogen. So they're still beneficial in those having.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that.
Yeah, good compost and good manure. Obviously, you're going to have plenty of nitrogen to feed your soil with, but there's other benefits as well. So
all those medicinal benefits, and the plant some of these plants put out fruit or leaves that are edible.
Yeah.
Either by us or by animals that we're raising. So there's multiple. That's what's so nice about guilds and about permaculture is all that function stacking.
Yeah.
Nothing serves just one purpose. And when you use a chemical fertilizer, and I know some people have to, it's not our favorite thing, but it only serves one purpose. But when you use a plant that does that, it serves so many purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I also want to say that when we're talking about nitrogen fixing plants, we are referring to the ones that actually put off these bacteria nodules on their roots. But most plants, and some better than others, are nitrogen fixing in different ways, and generally in the realm of leaf litter or chop and drop. You can feed your soil a ton of nitrogen with chop and drop and leaf litter from these trees and other plants. So it's not that they can't supply nitrogen. It's just that what's considered these nitrogen fixing plants do it through the root system. And it's probably a quicker process of conversion to a usable nitrogen than the breakdown from the top down going down through the soil. So it actually gets it quicker to the plants and more usable quicker to the plants. So that's what makes them nitrogen fixing in that way. And I say this because as we jump into some of these best nitrogen fixing plants, one that's so common, if we look at trees, is black locust.
Yeah, that's very common.
And it's nitrogen fixing. It puts the root nodules off. But so many people will actually consider honey locust nitrogen fixing as well, but it does not do that.
It doesn't. Okay, so because I actually put it on the list.
I had it on the list too. And then I did some research and I found a couple blogs who said it did, but then I got into some studies with some colleges and things, and it was like, no, it does not. And
so only through the leaves, it doesn't have nodules.
It just does a lot of dry. It's rich in its leaves, it's rich in the pods and things like that, and it drops and they decay. So it has a lot of nitrogen supplication that way through the litter,
but not through
the nodules. From everything I could find on a few studies I've seen. So so I mean, again, so black locust would actually be the better one of those if you're looking. I think there is some misinformation out there on it, but I was trying to find some really good studies on it, and I probably should have put some of those links in that I found, because
you should have.
Yeah, I might go back and look them up and include those in the show notes, because I mean, it looks as though, I mean, I'm not a scientist, don't even pretend to be one on the podcast. So, but people smarter than me who are doing these studies are saying, no, it does not have the modules.
Okay.
So, so I mean, makes sense, because black locust does seem to be the one more commonly used for that.
Nice.
And it'll grow in most of the continental U.S. Black locust is kind of its universal.
I think that grows as a perennial. It grows up here.
Yeah.
And I'm grow zone. It goes to 4, grow zone 4. Yeah. I'm not sure about 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you grow it up in Alaska or something like that, but I know in the continental U.S., you could probably grow it in most of the U.S. You probably couldn't grow it in some of the desert areas or maybe some of the super cold areas. But other than that, I'm sure it would grow most places in the U.S.
Yeah.
So it's a great one. I was watching a video where a guy was planting black locust right in the same ring with some other plants. Like he had an apple tree and he's planting black locust, and he would just keep coppicing that black locust every time it would get up starting to interfere with the apple tree. He'd chop it, and he had some in the rings where apple trees weren't planted with them, and the black locust tree was literally twice the size, the apple tree was literally twice the size of the apple trees that didn't have the black locust next to it.
Well, I guess I'm going to have to find myself some black locusts, because I have honey locusts started.
Yeah, and he just kept coppicing them every time they started interfering with the tree, because they're just coming back. They're really good about that.
Those, if you coppice them small, they wouldn't be as hard to cut down. They're known for being very, very hard on like a saw blade or something.
Yep, and he's just going.
They work great for posts or woodworking type stuff.
5-6 feet tall, where that apple tree was like 8 feet tall. He'd just go in and chop it at about 6 feet and cut it back down to a foot or whatever. Let it grow back up again. Just keep feeding that.
Yeah.
And what's cool about that is the way that these nodules are released are generally because the roots prune themselves back and die. So when you coppice something, the roots actually self-prune and it will release those nodules. So it's actually a better process for releasing those nodules. And because that's
Very
as
cool.
we're going to get into, we're going to talk about legumes and things later. And that's exactly what you have to do with those to get them to release the nodules. So black locust, again, it's actually better if you would coppice it or pollard it to get it to, self-prune those roots and kind of release.
Right. And when you say coppice, you're talking about basically cutting just above its shoulder, above the soil, and pollard.
Cutting. Yeah.
And then the pollard is up higher. Both of those are, old school techniques, but people use them for firewood, for all sorts of things.
Yeah. Some trees will not tolerate a coppice because it would just kill them. Black locust will.
Certainly would. Yeah. And they're such a great overall wood. They're a very hard wood. So anything you would use for a hard wood, you could use. And
it's just useful in so many ways. Yeah. You're going to be able to use that wood, for other things because it is such a great wood too. So it's great to have. So I guess what I'm saying here, even though it's a tree, doesn't mean it has to be some overstory tree.
Yeah. Right.
You could actually coppice it down, keep it low, let like an apple tree be your overstory tree if you want it to be.
Yeah, you can make it be more like a bush.
Yeah, and still use that as your nitrogen fixer. So it just because it's a tree doesn't mean it couldn't serve a lower purpose.
So this next tree is more of a bush, and people have love-hate relationships with it.
As they probably should, because in certain areas it can be very invasive.
It's taken over a lot of places here.
Autumn olive is what we're talking about. Yeah. And autumn olive it's got a lot of great qualities. Again, it's a nitrogen fixer. It puts off an edible fruit,
Yep. Little tiny berries.
Yeah. And so it's really good in so many ways. But it's very invasive. It will spread.
Yep.
And believe it or not, I did find this out about autumn olive. It's actually allelopathic.
Oh, I did not know that.
Slightly. So it does. The reason it spreads is because it actually will basically prevent some of its competition from taking over.
Yes, I did actually know that. It kind of kills off things around it.
So certain plants you probably wouldn't plant around it. It ain't quite as bad as like walnut and what it puts off, but it does put off a small amount of it, and things like your nightshades and things would actually be greatly affected by that. So you wouldn't want to be trying to grow like peppers or tomatoes in a guild with autumn olive because those are greatly affected by that. So, but some plants not at all, obviously.
And those are another one you can cut and they'll come back. You cannot really. It's pretty hard to hurt them.
But people also they hear that allopathic. And about it, and they're like, "Oh, you would never want to plant that then." Well, do you know sunflowers are also that? Do you know elderberry are also that? I mean, a lot of plants are that to a certain extent. It's just we think about walnut as being like this worst one, and you definitely things around a walnut.
Walnuts have, and there's even certain breeds of walnuts that don't have it as bad as other.
Yeah, the English, I guess, walnuts aren't as bad as like the black walnut. Yeah,
right.
But it's not to the level of that. So there's a lot of things that will grow near these things. Like I got elderberry in all my guilds and it doesn't affect anything from growing. And yet it's
you have autumn olive. We have some at our property.
No, I was saying elderberry I have in everything. And it's also slightly allopathic. And
we're trying to keep our autumn olive under control.
Yeah, I don't have any here. I don't have any autumn olive. We have some that's wild, but I don't have any on my property.
Yeah, we have it on our property. Not a ton of it yet. We're trying to avoid getting a ton of it.
Yeah, and it'll grow in the eastern, northeast, Midwest U.S. I mean, it'll grow all across there. Really good. Yeah. You might be able to kind of create microclimates where it'll survive in most of the United States, but I think that in these parts, it's just kind of wild. It just kind of, it's pretty invasive in some situations. One we don't have to deal with, but it's a great plant, is mimosa.
Yeah, plant. I've heard of it. I'm trying to picture what it looks like.
Very nutritious, very fast growing. I actually wrote an article on it because you can grow it here. Yeah. So but it's got a lot of benefits. So Southern US is growing mimosa.
All I can think of is the alcoholic drink. I don't even know
Alder,
what's in it because I've never had one.
yeah.
But when you're saying that, that's all I'm thinking.
Now, alder is one that's very common in Europe for being a nitrogen fixing plant and some other places too. It grows in the Northwest US, pretty common. I think you can grow it a lot of places, but you're kind of forcing it. It's not something
I don't think we
grow.
have it here.
No, we don't have it here either.
Yeah.
But and now I was mentioning earlier that like alder has a different bacteria. It's kind of different in how it works, but the same, different, but the same. Right. So it does work, but it's a really common one, but it's not one that you or I are probably going to go to as one.
Right. But if we have people that are listening in the Northwest, they would.
Yeah, it is one that grows there.
Use it. Yeah.
And again, another one that we're not going to use here is mesquite because that's more of Southwest.
Yeah, same thing. Yep.
But it's one that it's a nitrogen fixer as well.
I did not realize that was a nitrogen fixer.
I didn't either until I just started doing a little research on some nitrogen fixing trees, and it's one of them. And it does have the nodules as well. So there's some trees. I mean, there might be more. There are more. I've seen others.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
That will not grow here. They're more like in Australia or Asia or other places. But yeah. So there's a few there. Now, of course, there's this line you cross where shrub or tree. Was autumn olive a shrub or a tree? Some people would call it a shrub. Some people call it a tree.
Did you find out that redbud is not really a nitrogen fixer? Because I have heard that it is, but it's not on here. And I saw it on here earlier.
Because again, it's a leaf litter tree that people will
I was going to say, I swear you had that on here.
I did have it on the list and I removed it because I did more research and it does not produce the nodules.
Interesting.
But people consider it a nitrogen tree because the leaf litter is heavy in nitrogen.
Okay. Because the red bud, the bud part of it is actually also edible. People make jelly out of it. But it's
one of them you could plant as a nitrogen fixer and use the leaf litter and use it as chop and drop. But it's not one that does it through the roots.
Through the nodules. Okay.
Yep, through the nodules. So it's not like a... So yeah,
I was like, man, I'm losing it. I swear it was on here. I swear it was on here.
It was. You're right. And there were some others that I actually included that I found out that they weren't as well. Right. And I was like, wow. So I mean, I'm trying to be accurate on that because that's actually something I didn't know. I hear so many of those being referred to as nitrogen fixers.
Well, I had honey locust on here and I just deleted it because I thought honey locust was so.
Yeah. Shrubs. Now, like again, we're across the line between trees and shrubs. Is autumn olive a tree or a shrub? Is sea buckthorn a tree or a shrub? We're going to call these. I call those trees. I call these shrubs.
Buckthorn, I don't think it's nearly as tall as a tree. Those don't get huge.
And autumn olive, 8 feet probably. They don't get real big.
I've seen some really big ones.
Oh, have you? Okay, I always see them in like shrub forms. Yeah.
Like I can't remember where I was, but I said to somebody when we were walking, I said, is that an autumn olive? Because I'd never seen one that tall. Yeah. It was big.
Most of them I see are probably in the 8 or 10 feet range.
That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of what we see are like, 8 feet about,
Yeah.
I'd never seen one. This one was probably 12. I'd never seen.
What's the biggest sea buckthorn you ever seen?
I've never actually seen one in person. The only reason I know about them is Ben Falk talks about them all the time.
I have one that I purchased 2 years ago. It's about 5 feet tall, so it's not very big.
Have you gotten any berries off of it?
Yeah, a handful. Yeah.
Because I'm about to have 25 of them.
I collected those and I'm drying them out because I want to plant more. I want to get some seeds going and try to plant some more. So I'd like to have some more of those.
They're supposed to be so good for you. And then the nitrogen fixing. So that's why I got them because it's really hard to get omegas without eating lots of fish. And apparently sea buckthorn has lots of omegas in it.
Doesn't purslane also have that?
Yeah, it has some.
So I think purslane is one that you could also eat. Is another plant that would replace the omegas. I think
that sea buckthorn is one of the heaviest plants, or one of the only plants that are really heavy in omega-9.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, is it omega-3s that?
I'm not real sure, but
I'm not sure.
I know that it's one of the few plants, also purslane being one of the few plants that you can get omega.
So eating both of those could be very, very healthy.
Yeah. Well, sea buckthorn definitely grows in the northern zones really well.
Yeah, where it's cooler.
But it's pretty hardy, and it can grow in most of the continental U.S. as well. A lot of people, I've heard people down in Texas growing this area as well and stuff. So, just, I guess you might need some protection because it does seem to like the cooler climates a little bit better. But I think it can be grown in a lot of places. So it's a pretty universal one. One I've never grown, but I've heard a lot of people that really like it is the Siberian pea shrub.
I was going to ask you if you had, because
No, I've never seen it even, but I know I've heard people talk about it, and it grows kind of like in the northern plains over to the northwest United States.
So it likes cold.
Yeah, that temperate climate up there.
Cold, arid.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would grow here because
it might.
So I get cold, but it seems like the Northwest, depending on where in the Northwest,
yeah,
like
it's pretty wet. I don't know how far you go northwest because
if we're talking like Seattle, it's wet, but if we're talking like the northern plains, that's kind of arid.
So I'm not sure how far over it actually goes, but yeah, it's a really good one, I guess, for that as well. If you live in that area, it might be one you can take advantage of also. And one that I am just purchased some gumi seeds, so gomi seeds or whatever you want to call it, gomi or gumi.
Okay, I've heard about this, but I have no idea.
And it will grow in most of the continental U.S. as well. And I don't have it. I want it really, really bad. So I just recently purchased some seeds, but they're not going to ship them until late June, early August.
So what do they look like? Because I've heard of it, I don't
see them on videos. It's just a little round berry in the tree. I would think it's something similar to sea buckthorn, and it's in the way it looks, I think.
Like 4 to 6 feet tall.
Yeah, I would say in that range from what I've seen. Now, I've only just watched a couple of videos on them, and actually Edible Acres, he's doing a lot of work with them right now. And I've seen him talking a lot about them, and he's propagating a bunch of seeds from his plants. Nice. And I was watching some stuff he was doing, and I don't know a lot about them other than I really, really want them.
I'm hoping that a lot of these are also very good, maybe possibly some fodder trees, maybe not for all animals, but maybe rabbits or goats could eat some of them. That's what my hope is.
Yeah. And one that if you got some guilds out in your front yard like I do, and you want something really pretty out there, it's got some pretty flowers, wisteria.
Those are so pretty.
Yeah, and they're an actual nitrogen fixer.
I did not know that, and I always thought they were beautiful. So I might get some to look at them. I
was even watching a video that said the flowers were edible, and I didn't even know that. Now, most of the plant is toxic, but the flower petals, I guess, are actually edible. But yeah, they're nitrogen fixers. So to put one of them in a guild to add a little bit of beauty to your guild, awesome. So wisteria, I have one planted here, and I'm excited about it now. I was kind of just had it sour.
When you have like a suburban or an urban homestead and you have to worry about aesthetics and keeping neighbors happy and the city happy, it's nice to find stuff like wisteria that is nitrogen fixing. Parts of it are edible. I mean, you mix that with maybe some of these other like sea buckthorn that looks like a bush. Nobody ever will know it's edible.
Well, and they can get really, really big, but they can handle being pruned pretty aggressively very well. And you can even slap them up against a trellis and kind of tie them back away from everything else if you want to kind of give more things room to grow or whatever. So they're usable in a space where you're going to grow a lot of these other things.
You can use them in a suburban setting or an urban setting, and they still look pleasing to the eye, so people don't get upset with you.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to include that one in there as like this thing that you don't think of as being something like super useful in a lot of ways, but yet it's another use that I have.
You might be able to make a tea or some jelly out of those flowers.
There you go. So yeah, that's kind of like our there's probably a few others we didn't include, of course, in the trees and shrubs, but those are some pretty common ones that a lot of people refer to that I think can be really useful on a small homestead, and you can use them in your guilds or along, at the edge of a garden or something like that, just to have them. Now, again, there's a bunch that are considered nitrogen fixing, but because of the tree litter and I think they're still usable, and they're usable in that way. I just think it probably
they're just not going to fix as much.
I don't think it's going to fix it as quickly, and maybe not, just not as put it off as much into the soil.
Right. Yeah. And as regularly, because the leaves only fall once a year.
Yeah.
But those roots are always there.
Of course. Now that brings us to the herbaceous plants.
Yeah.
And we're going to mention a few here. Well, you're going to hear a lot of people refer to as comfrey as a nitrogen fixer, but again, not because of nodules. People refer to it as a nitrogen fixing because you can, you just mentioned what made me think of that right off the bat was because people, well, once a year. Well, not with comfort. You could take several cuttings a year of a lot of leaves and lay them down, let them break down. They break down really quick. So in that sense, they are nitrogen fixing. They have a lot of nitrogen.
Comfrey as more of a dynamic accumulator.
It is. It's exactly what it is. And it does have a high nitrogen count, but you're just letting them leaves break down. Again, that's going to have to work down through the soil. You could rototill it or dig it into the soil to make it go quicker, feed that soil quicker, but I'm not big on that. You're breaking up your soil food web and stuff. So it's better just break from the top down. Even though it does break down really quickly, I still think it's not going to be as good as anything that's feeding it through the nodules.
Right.
So it doesn't make the list as a nitrogen fixer in that sense, even though I use it for that like crazy in my garden. I lay it all over my garden around all my plants.
Yeah, I just did that
as a nitrogen fixer. I do, but it's just a different type of nitrogen fixer, not a quick nitrogen fixer. Red clover probably in the herbaceous plants is probably one that a lot of people would think of.
It's so common.
Yeah, it's a common cover crop.
It's affordable to buy.
Yep, exactly, and it serves purposes. It's a useful plant, and it's a great ground cover in the sense that it will it'll keep back the weeds and things too. Not as great as the other one that we'll mention down below in actual ground covers. But red clover is a really good one. Vetch is really common. For me, it's hairy vetch. That's one I kind of like.
Yeah, we have it wild at our property.
Yeah. And it can be invasive, but when it's used as a cover crop, if you're getting rid of it before it goes to seed and all that kind of stuff as a cover crop, it's an excellent cover crop that will put off a lot of nitrogen into your soil. So again, it's one that's very common. And then actually when you're breaking it down and you start chopping, because you're going to want to work that into the soil or lay it on the soil, not only is it good for the nitrogen, but it's also really good for the soil structure because it's a cover crop. So it's going to do a lot for that too. And other fertilities as well. I mean, it's actually just because it's a biomass, it's going to break down really heavily.
Well, and you're keeping that soil covered.
Yeah.
So this works really well. Like, actually in your garden where the other ones work a little bit better, maybe in guilds.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so there's a few cover crops, but I like vetch. It's just one that's because it feeds the soil really good. It's a good one to use. Again, if you're looking for something really to beautify your guilds.
Oh yeah.
Maybe like I said in the front, lupins. Yeah. Lupins are a beautiful flower. They got the tall flower. They get like a bunch of little flowers.
I tried growing some this year.
Yeah, they're it's you go down to Walmart and buy them. I mean, they're
so pretty.
Every place sells them, right? And you can actually put those into your guilds, bring it, a level of beauty, and feed your soil with them. They are a nitrogen fixer. They have the nodules as well. So I love stuff like that. That'll serve a purpose plus add some, visual appeal to your guilds and to your front of your property or whatever.
Well, now you have me questioning whether the next one is technically a nitrogen fixer, but I'm pretty sure it is the fenugreek. And I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it. So tell me.
It's a really pretty bright yellow flower. And so if you're going to pick to use the flower, you should pick it before it goes to seed. But it's the same thing. It's a really pretty bright yellow flower. You can use the seeds medicinally, but it does fix nitrogen into the soil, and you can do the same thing. It can die back right into the soil, and it's a pretty leafy plant, so you get a lot of biomass and such out of that to improve the soil. But
good news, Rachel. It is a symbiotic nitrogen fixation by rhizobium, so it does have the nodules. So you're good.
I started using the fenugreek, and hopefully I'm saying that right. A couple of months ago, just the seeds. We've been sprouting those and putting them on our salad, but you can also grind the seeds, and it's got like maybe a little bit of a licorice flavor. So anyways, I think I'm going to try to grow some of those too, because the plant itself is really pretty. It's a bright yellow flower with like a lighter green leaf. So I might put some of that in my beds.
Nice. Yeah, I got to look into that. Yeah. That sounds like a great one. I'm always looking for something that makes the beds look nicer, because I have guilds. I have guilds right up in the front by the sidewalk in front of my house. I have like a couple of guilds up there. Anytime I can add flowers or anything up there, or anything that has, it just looks more decorative, I like that because it just gives something, appeal for the front yard, which I like. So I like looking for stuff like that.
Yeah, we have a berm in our front yard because we get a lot of dust from we live on a dirt road, even though we're suburban and not that far from town. Our road is dirt. And we also needed to try to curtail the dogs from coming. The neighborhood dogs would come into our garden off the road, and putting that berm in and planting it really heavily with plants. We have no problems with the dogs coming into the yard anymore. Yeah. So yeah. I like things that I don't have to replant over and over. So it's mostly perennials up there, but I like it to look nice,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about a couple ground covers as well, because, one of the things you'll do in a guild is throw down a bunch of mulch usually. But if you could actually cover that soil with plants, that's even better, right? I mean, you still want to put some mulch around here and there, but plants do the same thing. If you can have like a living mulch, that's even better.
True.
And white clover is a great ground cover. We have a lot of white clover here, and it just grows through my grass. It's just everywhere, and it works its way into the guilds and everything else. And I'm not upset about it. And it's a nitrogen fixer, and it's a perennial. So it just stays there. It just comes back and it just keeps on producing, and you don't have to replant nothing or put down any more seeds or anything like that. It just continues to grow. But yeah, it's a great one. It does and it's so low growing that it won't shade anything out. Yeah. I mean, do
you ever interplant in yours, like in your garden? Do you ever interplant in yours in your garden?
The white clover?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I keep it out of the garden, garden beds. I'd have it in the guilds, but I do keep it, and I keep it around trees and everything else, but I don't really let it, because it's a perennial. I really just don't like it spreading, around through the garden bed. So I do keep it out of there. Another one is creeping red fescue. Now, I've never grown that. I've seen pictures of it.
I was just going to say, I haven't grown that.
Yeah. It's used in lawns and meadows, and it too is a nitrogen fixer and improves the soil health. So it's one that's really, really low as well, that, kind of just won't interfere with anything else, but yet will shade that ground, makes a nice living mulch.
I love those low ones, especially. I think if I could convince my husband to grow clovers instead of grass, that would be great.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't mind having a whole entire lawn of white clover.
Right?
Just because, it's feeding the soil and it's feeding the bees. You got that little flower, and the bees are all over it, crawling all over it. I mean,
you can tractor your animals.
And you'd hardly ever have to mow. I mean, white clover by itself, I don't know if you'd ever really have to mow it. It stays really, really low. And soft. Because in permaculture, a lot of people will use that as their pathways. They'll put down white clover in pathways. So, instead of, mulch, or because one of the problems with mulch and gravel and things like that is weeds, right? It will get in there and take over. Where if you just fill it with white clover, it ain't going to ever get very tall. You can walk through it.
I think I might try that, because the other problem we had with mulch was we get a ton of leaves because we have a lot of trees. And so when you're trying to do leaf removal, it would blow the wood chips too. But it wouldn't if it was white clover. They'll just stay.
Lay down heavy seed it with white clover seed and just let it.
I'm gonna have to try that in a couple of areas
Just a thought, and you're feeding the soil, and especially if it's around your garden beds, your paths around your garden beds, it's just dumping nitrogen right into that soil. Well, it ain't like it's just staying directly under that. It's it's branching out and feeding the soil around it. That soil, there's an entire web in that soil working, and it's going to go right through into your garden bed.
I love that. The soil food web.
Yeah. So let's just, again, we've been mentioning it as we go, but incorporating these nitrogen fixing plants into your permaculture garden, polyculture planting, obviously your guilds, around your trees, around other plants. Anytime you can just form a polyculture and use these nitrogen fixing plants, which, like I said, I don't like to just stick with the nitrogen fixing plants. I'm looking for dynamic accumulators. Yep. I'm looking for ground cover. I'm looking for the whole spectrum of things to include in my, all the layers.
Plants
and all
that attract bees, plants that detract bad bugs.
That's right. Yeah. Using them as cover crops. We talked about vetch, but there's other ones as well. Even clover. These are great cover crops. So when you start thinking about crop rotation, working your cover crops in. So this is another way to use your these nitrogen fixing plants. Don't have them planted alongside your plants, having them planted when your plants aren't in there. In the fall, grow cover crops in there, nitrogen fixing cover crops. take care of those before the year's up, the winter gets here, and then you plant your new garden in that the next year. Now you've dumped all that really nice nitrogen into your garden. Now we didn't get into is some of the things like beans and peas and legumes, all the things there that can also, I don't even know why we didn't put those in the list. Obviously those are good.
I was going to ask, did you find out those weren't?
No, they absolutely are. All the legumes are. They actually are, and they do have the nodules as well. So a lot of people, now there's a big misconception, and I bought into this for many, many years now about like the Three Sisters garden.
Yeah.
And how you'll plant beans alongside your corn and the nitrogen will feed the corn. It does not work like that. It does not work like that. You can plant them there. They will grow alongside them, but the nitrogen only gets released when that plant is chopped down.
Right.
Preferably, and it will release even more nitrogen if you chop it down before it puts off the beans. Because a lot of that nitrogen gets put back up into the beans.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
If you actually are going to use it as it's great to use it as a nitrogen fixer, but you want to actually chop it before it puts off the beans, before it starts producing beans. So you could do that.
You could use it as a crop. But when you put it into your rotation, it can be really beneficial. So that's why a lot of times we'll see farmers do their soybeans or their beans, and then the next year they do corn.
Yeah. Now they are getting the beans, but there's still there is still some nitrogen nodules in those roots. So rotating it, or even just having it there, and then something later, it's going to produce it that way. So it is kind of a misconception because people think they can just plant it alongside as a companion plant and it's going to feed the nitrogen to that. Why, like I even said about the black locust, it will prune those roots, self-prune those roots when you coppice that and put off even more. It will produce
that's what is so cool about coppicing and pollarding because of what it does, not just for the soil, but what it also does for the tree. It just kind of resets the tree's age too. It's crazy. All that.
And it's like, a lot of these are annual plants and flowers and things like that. So when they die back in the fall, or even perennials that die back in the fall and then come back, when they die back, it's releasing those nodules. And, so there's things like that happening. It's not when they're actually growing that it's actually putting off so much. It's actually the die back, and pruning back and things like that. And even with white clover, probably, I don't know this for a fact, but my assumption is that when you mow it, it chops it and it releases a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it would probably do better to cut it back occasionally and keep it a little shorter.
That soil science is just such a deep subject and so fascinating.
I could be wrong about that, but that's I assume that because of the way this works, because of the way these nodules will put off. But again, you don't ever want to pull these beans and peas and things like that, legumes, up by their roots. Always leave those in the ground. Always chop them.
Cut them
leave
off.
them there. Because they will release those nodules and produce and leave. I mean, not only the nitrogen, but also you just get that root breaking down into the soil for soil structure as well.
Right.
So that's how cover crops work. You're chopping them, they're releasing them. Plus you're going to get the heavy dieback of the nitrogen from the plant breaking down on the soil too for cover crops. So you kind of get it from underneath and above feeding the soil. So, of course, guild planting, which is polyculture, but that's often used in guilds. And then just having like hedges and windbreaks and things. You can, things like the Siberian pea shrub. I've seen a lot of people using them in like living fences. You could probably do the same thing with autumn olive. I think it would work really good.
I'm sure.
Windbreak or something like that to make a nice thick hedge with it. I think you could do it with sea berry and gomi and things like that as well.
You could create a fedge.
Yeah, a fedge hedge.
Food hedge. A food hedge.
So just some that's just some of the ways you can kind of use it in your gardens, or you use it in your guilds, use it on your property to do the nitrogen fixing. That's kind of the ways you want to use some of that. Some tips for success: select the right species that will grow. Don't be trying to grow mesquite in Indiana. Okay, it won't happen. Use something that's going to grow in your zone, obviously. So pick what's best for your climate, your soil conditions, what you need, to make the best use of it. Consider what you're planting it with, proper planting. Don't, if you're planning on letting something be an overstory tree, can think about what you're putting to plant under that. If you're going to shade out what you're trying to grow, if you're going to keep a coppice back, just consider all the things. Because not everything can be cut back like a black locust, and kept down low. So it might shade out other plants. So just pay attention to that. How, learn about the maintenance of those plants. Can you cut them back? Can you pollard or coppice them? Can you heavily prune them? What do they need to grow?
Yeah, because autumn olive gets pretty big, pretty nasty pickers on them too.
And when they're young, are they sensitive to drought and things? Are you going to have to heavily mulch these things in the beginning to kind of retain some moisture and keep the weed pressure back so they get a good start and get established really well? I mean, it's just things like that you want to consider, like with all plants and trees.
And when the smaller your lot is, the more you're going to want to make sure that these will work for your lot, because you have to think through those things. If they get 7 feet tall and they shade out your blueberry bushes or your apple trees, you're not going to want those there. So you're going to want to make sure.
So make sure it's something you can keep coppiced back or pruned back pretty heavily to let it, so it doesn't interfere with those things. Because if I got to pick between a black locust tree and my apple tree, I want the apple tree. I don't. I'm not eating a lot of black pock.
Well, you can put clover under your apple tree instead of the black locust.
That's right. Yeah. Apple tree. You have to consider these things. What's going to work best for your situation, what you're trying to do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that is where we're wanting to be with this. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go about this. I think they're so worth having on your property in different areas, like guilds, in the garden, along the side of the garden, around your trees. There's so much. And also a lot of this stuff can be, once you cut it, there's nitrogen in the leaves, especially when you're using the ones that are considered more of the mulching.
Like the honey locust.
Those are great to put in your compost and things like that, or just chop and drop. Absolutely. There's a lot of trees that will fit that criteria as well. But for the purposes of this episode, we're talking about the ones that put off the nodules
through the nodules,
through the roots and actually feed it underneath the soil. So there's so many ways to go about it. But I think there's something to be said about plants that feed the soil in this way to make that nitrogen available quicker. And
there's so many more plants than what you mentioned and what the little bit that I mentioned.
You can do some homework on that.
So
we can't cover them all. And like I said, a lot of them are, maybe not certainly not for my zone. A lot of them, and there's a lot of tropical and subtropical plants that can do it. I know, and so I don't pay a lot of attention to those kind of plants because I can't grow a lot of those kind of plants, right? So anyway, that's what we have for you on that. Let's jump into our recommendations. What do you have, Rachel?
Well, I did something that isn't really homesteading, except for it's like housekeeping type things, and glass cleaning, which I know sounds crazy, but I do a lot of it with my small cleaning business. And for years, it has been my nemesis. I have one office that is basically a showroom. So there's a lot of glass, tons of glass, and it's very shiny and blingy. And I would wash it and then it would be cloudy by the next week. And really, when you wash glass, it shouldn't get cloudy and filmy that quickly. It wasn't like fingerprints. It was just filmy. And I found out that there's certain things, after digging into research, I found out that there's certain things that you can use on glass that actually causes it to attract dust. So one of them was rubbing alcohol. So, and that was one of the things I was using because I liked it because it's streak free, but it does create almost this static on the glass that can actually cause it to attract dust. But it also can damage, which I didn't realize at the time, but it can damage certain window types. Thankfully, what I was using it on didn't have any like tinting or anything on it. So anyways, what I have found, crazy enough, it's super thrifty, is that just plain old water works really well. If you feel like you've got like fingerprints on it, maybe that are a little bit greasy, you can add just a little tiny bit of dish soap. And we're talking like a drop or two to a gallon of water. And my favorite thing to use is basically, it's like a scrubby that attaches to the end of like a broom handle. And you can scrub it, and then a squeegee. A squeegee is amazing, kind of like it is in your shower. It's amazing when it comes to windows. If you really, really want to use a cleaner, like if there's a lot of dirt, a lot of dog nose prints, actually a microfiber cloth works really well on dog nose prints. I know because I have 2 dogs. You can use the microfiber with some hot water and then squeegee it. The squeegee is the key for no streaks. But if you really need to use something, you use vinegar. Just white distilled vinegar, 1-to-1. So half a gallon of vinegar, half a gallon of water. And then if you're spraying it and you have a hard time with hard water spots, unfortunately, the best thing that they use now is distilled water, which gets kind of expensive. You can use a water distiller, which I have purchased one because I have the cleaning business, and I use a distiller. They're like $110. But
can you make moonshine with that?
Maybe.
Fuel. I meant fuel, not moonshine. Fuel. Can you make fuel?
It's fuel. It's fuel. I'm gonna guess you can. Anyways, so you can use that, but really you really just need water. A lot of window cleaners have gone away from actually using cleaners because it leaves a film, and have started using just distilled water to clean with. And that is what one of the houses I cleaned just had a big company come out and clean all their windows, and it's a very large house with very tall windows, and that was all they used. They used no cleaner, just distilled water.
Interesting.
Inside and outside. So that is not only economical, it's very environmental. You don't have to use any cleaner. But so anyways, the squeegee though is the ticket. I'm telling you, the squeegee is your best friend. So I put a link in there to the squeegee and that I use, and you don't have to buy that. People can go down and get one, but that's also how you keep your shower clean. Is a squeegee.
Yeah, keeping that. Yeah, you don't want mildew and stuff. Yeah, keep that on the spots. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you have glass, this also works really well with mirrors. I was having my biggest issue I was having is these big mirrors, because a lot of the bathrooms I clean are like the size of small bedrooms. And they have these huge mirrors. And no matter what I do, they were like cloudy and foggy, and it was driving me crazy. And then when I went in and just really doused them with just water and scrubbed all of basically the residue off of the stuff I had been using before, and went straight to just straight water on a rag and then squeegeeing it off, I have had no problems with the film and the cloudy and the streaks.
Nice.
So just plain water.
That's
crazy.
Important homesteady information as far as I'm concerned, because you know what, our homes are our homesteads, and we want to be able to keep them maintained, and that's very very good recommendation.
Yeah. Well, we spend all this time on our gardens. I like to be able to look out my window and see out my window and see my gardens.
That being said, I stayed to the task.
Books. I saw that.
No, I did want to recommend a couple books that are
these
really
are good books. I have both of these. I really like them.
Information or soil information or just everything guilds and permaculture. One that jumps into a little bit now, the Living Soil Handbook by Jesse Frost. Great book. I've recommended it many times. He definitely looks at everything from a market garden perspective.
Yes.
He's a market gardener. And so he's dealing with nitrogen fixing plants, but he's definitely doing it more from a crop rotation and cover crop point of view, because he's wanting to, he's doing market garden, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not talking about guilds and all that kind of stuff. So, but it is a great book. It's very practical.
I feel like it is also written so the beginner can understand it. I feel he does a wonderful job.
He's got a great YouTube channel too, by the way.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. But yeah, he's chapter 7 in that book is basically where he talks about nitrogen fixing plants. And like I said, generally it's more vetch and clover, things like that for more like crop rotation stuff. But he does talk about it in that book. Now, probably the Bible on this is Edible Forest Gardens.
Yes.
And there's a 2-volume set by Dave Jackie. These books are intense. Now chapter 5,
a college course.
Yeah. Chapter 5 of volume 1 is where he really starts getting into. He talks about the nitrogen fixing plants, but throughout both volumes, all the way through, it's referred to it's talking about applying it in practice with these nitrogen fixing plants and guilds and the planting and just it's just intertwined through both volumes. So, yeah, if you want to know everything and then some about forest gardens or food forests, these books are incredible. I mean, I've tried reading straight through them, and that's really difficult. I find them better as a reference book and just hitting them when I'm like, I jumped on in there for this kind of stuff. And, but yes, so much information, so much.
Yeah. I think the only way you could use those as something that you read just straight through is if you were approaching it as like a self-taught college course.
Yeah.
Like you literally were just sitting there taking notes, trying to ingest.
Yeah. I got about 3/4 through volume 1, which is the smaller of the two books.
Yeah.
And it was intense. And I'm going to tell you what, it feels like a college course when you're reading it.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm a person who thought I knew a fair amount about food forests, forest gardens until I read those books. And then I'm realizing that I don't.
I need to read them again because I feel like I retained 10% of it. I actually only own volume 2. I need to buy volume 1, but I checked them both out from the library multiple times because I thought that I could check them out from the library, bring them home and read them. No,
they're a little bit expensive. They're $90 range, but I'm going to tell you, yes, for the 2 volumes. But honestly, they're worth it. There's few books I could say that are worth that. Those 2 books are worth that. They absolutely are. So anyway, those are my recommendations: Living Soil Handbook and Edible Forest Gardens 2-volume set. Great stuff. If you're interested at all about soil health and guilds and planting and permaculture. And so anyway, I think that's all we have on this. We could have went so deep on this, but I think we let people just kind of take it there from there and do their own study from there on out. But do you have anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I mean, I feel like you did a lot of the work in this one after I was the one that suggested the topic. But
I just beat you to the notes. That's all.
You did.
Well, folks, until next time, happy homesteading. God bless.
And grow where you're planted.